I think that, well, first I was born on Earth Day, so I sort of like to think that part of it was a little bit predestined. So I guess I can, but I think that I've always grown up with this sort of love of nature and kind of inquisitive, appreciation for science, and at the same time, honestly, never quite had the confidence to pursue science. And in school and in university, it wasn't until I had one of my first professors. I took a course for fun, and it was on terrestrial planets, and I discovered I actually really, science is really cool, and yet I didn't feel like I had the background to go into it. And I think this is part of a kind of systemic problem that we face, as a lot of societies don't tend to encourage women into going into science. And I think this was something that I faced. It was kind of a confidence issue, and having my first mentor encourage me and say, the math is a tool that can help you understand. It's just a toolbox that can help you understand the physical processes, but it's really the curiosity and, going out into the field and exploring these changes and, in geology and the climate. And so I guess I was first encouraged both by the professor who really believed in me before I kind of believed in myself. And back in high school, I had a high school project that was looking at, this was back in the United States in Massachusetts. And one of my friends and I we were really upset about plastic bags. It was kind of a simplistic thing that started out by collecting the number of plastic bags we were seeing blowing up on the sides of the streets and in, gutters, and realizing that there's a ton of pollution, and plastic pollution particularly, doing a little bit of research into it. And we ended up lobbying the Massachusetts state legislature. And I guess a year afterwards, they ended up having one of the first taxes on plastic bags. So it was sort of seeing who knows how much of it was really from our letter writing campaign and how much of it was that this is just a really big problem. But I think it was seeing this, the value of taking action and standing up for something when you see a problem in your neighborhood. And I guess now I sort of continue to be inspired by all of the different waves of students who are taking to the streets when they feel like there's an action on climate. And, from David Attenborough, who's now 94 and just has a new documentary released and went to Chernobyl to film the opening scenes and is still very much engaged and very active, to kids of all ages who are really standing up and trying to make a difference and saying, we demand change. This is not okay to be, throwing away our future by increasingly extracting fossil fuels. And then I guess for my own research, it was seeing Josh Fox's film Gasland that talks about all about the problems of fracking and the fact that governments across the planet are increasingly turning to more extreme versions of extracting energy, with more and more significant problems on the environment, human health, animal health. And I think for me, what's amazing is just the diversity and the fact that climate activists are from all walks of life. And I continue to sort of have new heroes and role models that keep me inspired and motivated. In terms of the groups that suffer most, studies show increasingly that locations of extractive industries are cited in communities of lower socioeconomic status, communities of color. Look at the Dakota Access Pipeline and the fact that it took a whole movement to sort of stand up for this before action was taken. One of the most interesting things that I came across in my research on fracking was really the fact that fracking is disproportionately cited in communities of color, EAME communities, lower socioeconomic status communities. And here in France, where I am currently, they had the world's first ban on fracking. And there's a new law that says there's no exploitation of oil and gas from 2040. And at the same time, this is largely a symbolic rule because even though exploitation of fossil fuels is banned, it really accounts for a very small proportion. There's not that much, there currently wasn't much extraction of oil and gas. And what was really interesting was finding out that French-based corporation Total Energy is now extracting shale gas in Algeria. And there have been widespread public protests, and there are significant problems with drought and lack of water. And a majority of the population is really against this and have a long, deep-seated mistrust of these French corporations. And this is a clear continuation, in my opinion, of these post-colonial tendencies and really NIMBYism, not in my backyardism. And I guess that what sort of gives me hope is that there's a new law. It's a little bit similar to the UK's Modern Slavery Act. In France, it's called the Droit de Vigilance, the Duty of Care Act. And this is the world's first law of this kind, which explicitly combines the need for human rights protections and extending the duty of care beyond the country that one is operating. So it means that anybody who has a stake, anybody who has a say, really any stakeholder, can bring suit on French territory if a French company is extracting or doing something outside France that's damaging the environment, damaging human rights. And there are two ongoing cases. They're still sort of working their way through the courts, but one of them was in Uganda, and it's based on the Lake Albert extractive region, where there have been significant impacts on the environment. And I think this is something that kind of gives me hope, and I hope that this Duty of Care Act can serve as a model for countries across the globe to start expanding the duty of care, looking at the supply chains, transparency, who are the people who are being hurt, and what benefit for whom. And I think this is particularly important, and I hope we'll start serving for extending this kind of duty of care beyond just having a law here and yet saying that we're going to extract somewhere else in a country that and having this kind of inherent racism and the fact that climate issues tend to sort of disproportionately impact the people who have the least agency. And so I think that's really the evidence of who's not being involved in these decisions, because decisions are being made that impact these communities. I think also ensuring that every citizen has a seat at the table. And when we're really talking about these decisions that impact everybody, everybody should have a voice. The Gilets jaunes here, a lot of that, I think what was so interesting is that it was really ostensibly a climate positive action. This was sort of, a tax on petrol to reduce the amount of pollution. So on the surface, it seems like a really good issue. At the same time, even when we have these policies and these actions that are really meant to be beneficial for the climate, they can disproportionately impact certain people, such as taxi drivers, who then take on a much greater brunt of this burden. And it was a decision that sort of came from the top without much discussion and engagement with communities. And I think that's the key issue here. It really is that, and I've noticed this again in the situation in Lancashire with fracking, where the Secretary of State for Local Communities, who in theory should be representing local communities, could overturn a local county council, Lancashire County Council decision not to allow fracking on grounds of national energy interests. And so I think there's so many times when there are decisions that come from, maybe they're being made in London and Westminster, and they impact communities in the north, and the people who are making these decisions don't take the time to visit the communities there and speak to people and understand what the issues are. So I think it's sort of both amplifying voices and also really ensuring that, voices that are not necessarily activist voices, but people in communities are being heard. Sometimes you find these activists who are sort of accidental activists, where they feel like they've been so pushed into a corner. There's so much, pollution, there's so much damage, that they're suddenly pushed to a point where they can no longer sit by and just let it happen. And they get into these sort of positions of activism because there's no choice. And I think that too, sort of finding ways of enabling people to participate in the data collection, enabling people to participate in sort of telling the stories of local communities, and this kind of the fact that every community is different. Every community has something of value that they stand to lose if pollution and climate change takes away their livelihood and their way of life. And how do we find those sort of hidden voices that are not necessarily the sort of first to stand up and be activists, and how do we amplify those voices as well? I think to me, what's so important is that nobody is too young or too old or too shy or whatever to make a difference, and it's really leveraging both this power of collective action. And I think what's so exciting for me, the opportunities presented by this really difficult time that we're facing, but the fact that there really is the opportunity to attend conferences, to connect with people, to amplify voices without much cost, really easily. And the fact that even going to the People's Plan website, you can make a difference by signing the petition. It just takes a couple of clicks. And I think that both informing yourself and really spreading awareness of these issues. So if you're, student and you're babysitting a little kid and you decide instead of having an indoor activity, you take them out in nature and start looking at, why does this tree look like it's not doing well, or what are the changes that you're seeing around, and kind of spreading awareness in that way. Or, when Christmas time comes around, thinking about what are conscious gifts that we can give. There's so many organizations that have impactful gifts that really sort of, make a difference for climate change, or, other holiday seasons, whatever it is, and kind of voting with your pounds, making a difference with thinking about researching the companies that you're spending your money, looking at your groceries, trying to reduce the amount of waste, recycling more, writing letters to your local county council. And I think also really getting involved with organizations. And I think that's one of the things that was so empowering for me when I first got involved with Leaders in Energy. I had moved to Washington, D.C. I was there for research. I didn't know anybody, and I was really pretty shy. And I sort of felt isolated because I was doing research at my university at Imperial, so sort of keeping a London schedule from 5 hours, behind. And I was kind of struggling to find a community. And the first thing I did was start volunteering at events, and it kind of gave me a bit of a purpose. I would, help with registrations for events. I discovered that slowly, it helped me build confidence, and I started interviewing people and writing articles. And that for me was kind of my way of finding my niche. And I think that what's so wonderful about the climate community is there's so many opportunities, whether it's through art or poetry or public speaking or writing articles, or even just reading and educating yourself and sort of talking to your friends or your colleagues, your parents, your siblings about these ideas. And I think that's what's fantastic, is that now there are so many opportunities being opened up by the power of Zoom and this sort of, the digital interconnectedness of today's society. And, even when you go to Google and you're asked to select all the boxes that have a stoplight or whatever it is, you're participating in citizen science. That's adding to the body of knowledge. So leveraging that power and really engaging in whatever way makes you happy and makes you feel empowered. No, I think that, putting people and planet over profit, I think it's pretty simple. I think we've seen that our current system does not work. It hurts the planet, it hurts people, and this has been far too long. And at the same time, since, the UK's first Climate Change Act back in 2008 with these binding targets really reduced emissions from, I think there was a 42% reduction between 1990 and 2017. So we've known about this problem for far too long. And yet at the same time, I think that there's been too much of a focus on the small incremental changes and not the radical dramatic changes that we need in our society and the way our economic system functions. I think the Green New Deal is the way to go, and it's the way moving forward. And I think that in all of the sort of damage and destruction in the wake of COVID, we have an opportunity to rebuild something better and stronger that works for everybody and doesn't, and I think that we have to leverage this power of this incredible energy of all of the people who are really mobilizing and taking to the streets and signing petitions and campaigning, and use that to make a better future.